Justice finally caught up with a player once seen as untouchable in the WNBA, following a firestorm of controversy sparked by racially charged remarks aimed at rising star CaitlinClark. The incident unfolded during a high-stakes, emotionally charged matchup between the Indiana Fever and the Atlanta Dream. As the fourth quarter wore on and tensions escalated, what began as a competitive game quickly devolved into something far more serious. Following a series of fouls, a veteran player fouled out in dramatic fashion, and what appeared to be offensive language aimed at Clark was caught on camera, igniting a firestorm of public outrage. The video footage made its way across social media platforms almost instantly. Lip readers and commentators weighed in, suggesting that the veteran player uttered a racially derogatory phrase aimed directly at Clark, who has become the face of a new generation of women's basketball. While fans were divided at first, the clarity of the footage left little room for doubt. Yet, despite the growing storm, the WNBA's initial reaction was one of silence. Days passed without comment, prompting critics to question whether the league was once again shielding one of its stars from the kind of accountability that would be swift and harsh for a lesser-known player. Behind the scenes, however, pressure was building. Fans voiced their frustration in forums, on social media, and during games. Sponsors quietly began raising concerns, worried about the optics of associating with a league that seemed unwilling to take a stand against racism. Even fellow players, who often avoid commenting on controversies involving their peers, began to express discontent privately and, eventually, publicly. The league, long accused of favoring certain players regardless of their behavior, now faced an existential challenge: enforce its own stated values or risk losing credibility entirely. Eventually, that pressure broke through. The WNBA announced a formal suspension of the player in question, a moment that sent shockwaves across the basketball world. The punishment wasn't just a reaction to a single incident of poor conduct. It symbolized a much larger shift. For years, there had been murmurs about preferential treatment, of certain players being allowed to act with impunity due to their fame or past contributions. This suspension shattered that illusion. It sent a clear message that no one, regardless of legacy or status, is immune to consequences. The ripple effects were immediate and profound. The suspended player faced not only the loss of several game checks, but also the unraveling of long-standing endorsement deals and potential speaking opportunities. What had once been a carefully cultivated public image, rooted in strength, perseverance, and advocacy, was now tainted by controversy. For many observers, the downfall was not only about the racist language itself, but what it represented: a betrayal of the values the player had long claimed to uphold. Commentators who once hesitated to criticize this player openly began to speak out. They questioned how long the league had turned a blind eye to problematic behavior, and why it took such a public spectacle to trigger accountability. The incident became symbolic of a larger problem in professional sports, where popularity and legacy often shield athletes from consequences. Now, those shields were clearly failing. Fans reacted with a mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that the league finally took action. Disappointment that it took so long and only under immense public pressure. The situation also reignited discussions about the controversial prisoner swap that had brought the player back to the U.S. just years prior. For many, that international exchange represented a second chance, an opportunity for redemption. But now the sentiment had shifted. What was once framed as a rescue mission now seemed like a cautionary tale about squandered opportunity and misplaced gratitude. Interestingly, the athlete's reaction following the suspension was subdued. Rather than deflect blame or deny the incident, the player acknowledged the consequences, even if only implicitly. There was no fiery rebuttal, no grandstanding denial. In fact, the tone seemed more resigned than defiant. Supporters, including former teammates and coaches, attempted to frame the situation as a misunderstanding, pointing to the heat of the moment or suggesting that the remarks were misinterpreted. Yet the broader public wasn't buying it. The evidence, both visual and contextual, was too overwhelming. What had once been excused as competitive fire was now being recognized for what it was: unacceptable behavior, plain and simple. The league's newfound backbone coincided with a pivotal moment in its evolution. CaitlinClark, whose explosive rise has brought millions of new eyes to women's basketball, has single-handedly changed the game's media landscape. With her popularity came increased viewership, merchandise sales, and cultural relevance. For the WNBA, protecting that momentum meant protecting Clark, not from criticism, but from abuse and targeted hostility. The suspension, therefore, wasn't just about one player's punishment. It was about the league affirming its future. Corporations took notice. Sponsors who had previously expressed discomfort now praised the WNBA's decision. Television networks negotiating new contracts breathed a sigh of relief. Image matters more than ever in today's media-driven world, and this moment was a stark reminder of how quickly things can spiral when accountability is delayed. Internally, teams and management began reassessing their own policies. Coaches found themselves caught between defending their players and preserving their professional reputations. General managers, too, began to weigh the risk-reward calculus differently. The idea of keeping a controversial star on the roster no longer seemed worth the baggage. For agents representing the suspended player, the landscape became even more treacherous. Every conversation about sponsorships, media appearances, or brand partnerships now had to address the controversy. The client was no longer an asset, they were a liability. Retirement rumors began to circulate. At the veteran's age, and with so much damage done to their public standing, many began to speculate whether this would be the final chapter